13. Simple practices that slow your overthink brain to have focus and clarity. Your brain was not designed for the storm it is constantly facing today. Every moment it is bombarded with endless notifications, unfinished tasks, decisions waiting to be made, and the invisible pressure of comparison. Modern life has created a battlefield inside the mind, where thoughts no longer flow, but collide. Overthinking is the silent thief of clarity, the hidden parasite that consumes your energy before the day even begins. You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, your mind has already rehearsed 1,000 scenarios that will never happen. You try to focus, but instead of moving forward, you get trapped in spirals of what if and should I. The more you try to think your way out, the deeper you fall into the maze of your own mind. Science explains this chaos with brutal clarity. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation, is hijacked by constant digital stimulation, making it impossible for your brain to hold steady attention. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods your system as your body interprets overthinking as a threat, leaving you restless and exhausted. And yet, clarity is possible. Neuroscientists like Andrew Huberman have shown that simple tools you can practice right now, can shift your nervous system from chaos into calm. Philosophers like Descartes once asked, "What can I know for certain?" And in that question lies a door out of mental noise. The power to separate what is real from the illusions created by fear. Imagine your mind as a river. Overthinking turns it into a flood, muddy and violent, impossible to cross. But when you slow the current, the water clears, the depth appears, and you can finally see the bottom. This is what focus feels like. Not the absence of thought, but the slowing down of unnecessary noise, so what truly matters can rise to the surface. These next moments are not about theory, they are about practices, each one tested by science and sharpened by wisdom, that will allow you to take control of the current in your head. By the end of this journey, you will not only understand why your brain spins out of control, you will know how to stop it. 13 practices, simple yet profound, will give you the ability to interrupt the loops that drain your energy, to calm the noise before it takes over, and to recover the focus and clarity you've been craving. If you've ever felt trapped in your own mind, unable to breathe beneath the weight of your thoughts, this is where you will learn to break free. The practices ahead are not complicated. They are seeds that, once planted, grow into resilience, presence, and the unshakable ability to direct your mind instead of being directed by it. Practice 1. The 1-minute reset, interrupting cognitive loops. There is a moment when your thoughts begin to spiral. You feel it. Your mind latches onto a single worry, then multiplies it into countless scenarios, each more chaotic than the last. This is the cognitive loop, the brain caught in its own trap. But here lies the truth. You do not need an hour of meditation to break free. Sometimes all it takes is one deliberate minute. The body holds the key to calming the mind, and science proves it. Andrew Huberman has described what he calls the physiological sigh, a simple yet powerful breathing pattern that shifts the brain out of overdrive and into clarity. Here's how it works. 2 quick inhales through the nose, followed by a slow, extended exhale through the mouth. This pattern activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch that signals safety to the body and slows the storm inside your head. In less than 60 seconds, heart rate drops, oxygen balance resets, and cortisol levels begin to stabilize. What feels overwhelming loses its grip because the brain receives the message. You are safe. The loop is interrupted. Think of it as pulling the emergency brake on a runaway train. Overthinking feeds on momentum. The faster thoughts run, the harder they are to stop. But with 1 minute of conscious breathing, you cut the chain reaction before it consumes you. Descartes would call this a return to certainty, a way of regaining control over what is real. The air filling your lungs, the body anchoring you in the present. From this foundation, clarity begins to rebuild itself. You might doubt how something so simple could make a difference. That doubt itself is a form of overthinking. The truth is, the most profound tools are often the simplest. A 1-minute reset is not about solving your problems in an instant, but about reclaiming the ability to think clearly enough to face them. It gives you space, and in that space, you find strength. Practice this reset whenever you feel the spiral begin, between meetings, during stress, even at night when the mind refuses to rest. The more you use it, the faster your brain learns to associate the act with relief. Overthinking thrives when you feel powerless against your own mind, but with one deliberate minute, you remind yourself that you are not a prisoner of your thoughts. You are the one who decides when to step off the train and breathe. And as you practice this reset, you'll notice something deeper. The spiral loses its authority, and focus slowly becomes your natural state. Practice 2, the dopamine declutter. Your brain is wired to chase stimulation, but in the modern world, that wiring is constantly hijacked. Every notification, every scroll, every sudden sound is a spark of dopamine, the chemical of anticipation. But dopamine is not endless. When you flood your system with small hits, checking your phone every 2 minutes, multitasking between tabs, jumping from one unfinished thought to another, you create a brain addicted to chaos. Overthinking thrives in this environment because the mind never learns to stay with one thing long enough to resolve it. It jumps, it scatters, it spins. Neuroscientists describe this as dopamine fragmentation. Each microstimulus feels urgent, but in reality, it leaves your brain starved for deep focus. The cycle is cruel. The more stimulation you seek, the less satisfied you feel, and the more anxious your thoughts become. Jordan Peterson warns that without order, chaos devours meaning. Here, the order comes from intentionally reclaiming your dopamine balance. This is where the practice of dopamine decluttering begins. It is not a radical detox, but a daily space where your brain learns to breathe without constant interruption. Set aside 30 minutes where all microstimuli are cut off. No phone, no notifications, no unnecessary noise. During this time, choose one simple task: reading a page, drinking a glass of water in silence, observing your breath, or walking slowly outside. At first, your mind will protest. It will itch to reach for the phone, to check something, to feed the craving for stimulation. But if you hold steady, something profound happens. The overthinking fog begins to thin because the brain is no longer scattered across dozens of small distractions. This is not just about calm. It is about training focus. Dopamine, when released in balance, rewards depth. It reinforces clarity when you complete a task, when you stay present, when you resist the urge to fragment your mind. The more you practice this declutter, the easier it becomes to direct your attention with purpose. Aristotle said, "Excellence is a habit, not an act." Dopamine decluttering is the habit of teaching your brain to stop feeding on scraps of stimulation and start savoring the fullness of clarity. Overthinking loses its grip when the brain stops running in 1,000 directions at once. 30 minutes of daily declutter becomes a sanctuary, a mental reset that tells your mind, not everything demands my attention, not every thought deserves my energy. And within this space, the first sparks of true focus are born. Practice 3. Thought externalization, the 2-minute brain dump. The mind is a container, but it was never meant to store everything at once. When thoughts have no exit, they begin to echo. One small worry grows, not because it's real, but because it's repeated. This is the nature of mental loops. They feed not on truth, but on accumulation. A single unfinished task, a vague fear, a random comment, all of it crowds the same limited space in your working memory. And the more crowded it gets, the harder it is to find clarity. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers a deceptively simple tool to break this spiral: externalization. The act of removing thoughts from your mind and placing them outside yourself, where they can be seen, sorted, or discarded. Think of your thoughts as tabs open in a browser. You don't need to close all of them, but you do need to see what's open before your system crashes. Set a timer for 2 minutes. Take a piece of paper or open a blank screen and write, fast, unfiltered, without judgment. Don't correct grammar. Don't search for meaning. Don't even reread. This isn't journaling. This is dumping. Everything you're thinking, fearing, planning, regretting, pour it out. What happens next is not magic, it's neurological. The brain, when it sees the thoughts outside itself, recognizes that it no longer needs to hold them in working memory. This creates cognitive relief. Your prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and planning, finally gets a break. That break, even for a moment, restores bandwidth. And with bandwidth comes clarity. Overthinkers often confuse thinking more with solving better. But solution rarely lives in the spin. It lives in the pause that follows the release. When Descartes sought clarity, he didn't accumulate thoughts. He questioned them. Writing them down is the first act of interrogation. Is this true? Is this mine? Is this useful? This 2-minute brain dump isn't about organizing your life. It's about creating internal space. You will not sort everything in 2 minutes, but you will no longer be tangled in a knot of your own invisible threads. And that's where focus begins to grow, not from more control, but from less clutter. Make this a daily habit. 2 minutes before bed, 2 minutes before work, 2 minutes before you spiral. Each time you'll teach your mind something vital. Not every thought is permanent. Not every problem must be solved internally. There is freedom in the simple act of letting it out. Practice 4. The sensory anchor. When the mind spirals into overthinking, it disconnects from the present. Your body may be sitting still, but your thoughts are racing across past regrets, imagined futures, hypothetical disasters. This dissonance between mind and body is the breeding ground of anxiety. The brain starts searching for danger that doesn't exist in the room you're in. But the body always tells the truth, and in that truth lives your anchor. The sensory anchor is not a concept, it is an experience. It is the practice of pulling the mind out of abstraction and into sensation. Andrew Huberman describes how the brain's attentional system is deeply intertwined with sensory input. When you engage fully with one sense, you override mental noise. You stop processing imagined data and start responding to real, immediate signals. Pick one sense, just one. Touch, smell, sight, sound, taste, and give it your full awareness. Press your fingers against a textured surface and study the pattern. Smell the air, a leaf, the fabric of your shirt. Close your eyes and listen for the most distant sound you can detect. Sip something slowly and try to name each layer of flavor. This isn't mindfulness as a buzzword. It's an act of neurological interruption. The overthinking brain thrives in abstraction, but senses pull it into the concrete. You cannot simultaneously ruminate on 10 future outcomes and truly feel the coldness of water on your skin. The two states are neurologically incompatible. That's why the sensory anchor works. It's not about stopping thought. It's about replacing chaotic thought with focused presence. Montaigne once said that the soul, which has no fixed purpose, loses itself. Sensory anchoring offers a fixed point, not of grand philosophy, but of physical reality. And in that point, your thoughts slow, not because you told them to, but because you gave them something real to hold on to. When practiced often, the brain begins to remember. It learns that safety can be felt, not just reasoned. That clarity doesn't always come from thinking harder, but from noticing deeper. The fog lifts not through effort, but through contact with what is right in front of you. Make this anchor your default rescue. When you feel the loop beginning, don't argue with your mind. Don't chase logic. Just pick a sense and dive into it with full presence. The body never overthinks. And the moment you trust it, you begin to think clearly again. Not because your problems disappeared, but because you return to the only place where clarity has ever existed, the now. Practice 5. Question reversal. Stoic clarity tool. Overthinking feeds on one dominant instinct, fear of what could go wrong. The mind, trying to protect you, rehearses disaster. It imagines loss, failure, rejection, constructing detailed blueprints of a future that may never happen. And because the brain cannot distinguish between imagined and real threats, your body reacts as if every possibility is already unfolding. Anxiety rises, focus dissolves, and you're pulled deeper into the spiral. But what if the problem isn't the question, but the direction in which it's pointed? Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, did not ask how things might fall apart. He asked what he could do if they did. He trained his mind not to fear uncertainty, but to reframe it. This is the foundation of question reversal, a practice that rewires the overthinking brain to seek opportunity instead of catastrophe. Instead of asking, "What if it goes wrong?" ask, "What if it goes right?" Instead of imagining the worst version of yourself showing up in a conversation, imagine the strongest. Instead of projecting rejection, visualize connection. This shift is not delusion, it's discipline. Your mind is already imagining things. You're just choosing which version of the future it rehearses. From a psychological perspective, this is a redirection of cognitive bias. Your brain is pattern-driven. Once it locks into a negative prediction, it scans the world to confirm it. But reverse the lens, and it starts seeking evidence of success. This isn't wishful thinking. It's creating a feedback loop where your emotional state improves because your cognitive filter shifts. And when emotion improves, clarity follows. You begin to move differently, speak differently, think differently, because the storm that once came from within now begins to quiet itself. Jordan Peterson might say this is the act of voluntarily facing chaos with structure. Instead of shrinking before uncertainty, you approach it with purpose. Reversal works best when spoken aloud, not affirmations but direct questions. Before a decision, whisper to yourself, "What if this unlocks something I didn't expect?" Before a challenge, ask, "What if I'm more ready than I think?" The act of questioning is like light. It exposes the architecture of your thoughts. And when you reverse that light, you start seeing doors where your fear only saw walls. This isn't about ignoring risk. It's about refusing to let fear be the only voice in the room. By reversing the question, you regain authorship of your attention. You place your mind back into your hands, and from that grip, your focus begins to sharpen, not because the world changed, but because the lens through which you see it did. Practice 6. Endorphin trigger. Small movement breaks. There are days when your mind feels like a room without windows, claustrophobic, tense, buzzing with thoughts that won't sit still. You try to push through, to think harder, to force mental clarity. But you forget that the mind doesn't float freely. It rides inside a body. And if that body is static, tight, or depleted, so is your focus. You can't think your way out of tension you haven't moved through. Endorphins are your brain's natural mood stabilizers. They're not a concept, they're chemistry. Released through physical movement, they change the way you feel, and by extension how you think. Neuroscientists like Huberman have shown how even a few minutes of intentional movement can shift brain states, improving alertness and lowering cognitive friction. You don't need a full workout. You need activation, a small, deliberate reset that interrupts stagnation. Stand up, stretch, roll your shoulders, walk a few slow circles in your room. If you can, get outside. If you can't, open a window. Your goal isn't cardio, it's reconnection. When you move, blood flows, oxygen increases, and your nervous system shifts from frozen to fluid. That shift isn't just physical, it clears the mental static too. Thoughts that were stuck begin to loosen. Solutions you couldn't find start to show themselves. The overthinking brain is like a motor that's been left running too long. It heats up, it loses efficiency, it starts producing noise instead of clarity. But when you move, you cool it. You refresh the circuits. You remind your body and your brain that you're not trapped, you're in motion, and motion gives you perspective. This practice becomes most powerful when it's ritualized. Every 90 minutes, step away from your screen and move for 2 minutes. Not because you feel like it, but because you've decided to. Excellence isn't a mood, it's a rhythm. And this rhythm teaches your brain that rest and reset are not a reward, they're a foundation for focus. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But movement breaks that illusion. It brings you back to the real, feet on the ground, air in your lungs, presence in your limbs. It interrupts the loop not with thought, but with action. You're not escaping your mind, you're unlocking it. The body holds the key, you just have to turn it. Practice 7. The Descartes method. Filter through first principles. Not all thoughts are created equal. Some arise from truth, others from habit. Some are born from reason, others from fear wearing a mask of logic. When you're caught in overthinking, the brain loses its ability to filter these origins. Everything feels equally urgent. Every doubt feels valid. Every what-if becomes a reality inside your nervous system. But clarity begins when you challenge that illusion, not with emotion, but with reason. That's where Descartes enters. René Descartes built his philosophy on radical doubt. He stripped away assumptions until only one certainty remained. I think, therefore I am. From that point, he rebuilt his understanding of the world, one truth at a time. This process isn't abstract. It's a tool, a method of slicing through mental noise by asking a simple but powerful question. What do I truly know for certain about this situation? The Descartes method starts when you catch yourself spiraling. Pause and interrogate the thought. Is it a fact or is it a projection? Is it something I've observed or something I've assumed? If this were placed in front of a court of reason, would it hold up or would it collapse under scrutiny? Cognitive behavioral therapy uses similar framing, separating thought from fact, belief from evidence. But Descartes did it centuries earlier, using logic not to outthink his emotions, but to tame them. When applied to overthinking, this method forces your brain to slow down. It replaces anxious velocity with philosophical precision. Here's the practice. When a thought begins to loop, stop and name it. Ask, what do I know for certain? Then ask, what do I believe without proof? And finally, what's the most rational step forward? These 3 steps pull you out of speculation and place you into grounded analysis. They cut the fog with a scalpel of clarity. In a world addicted to urgency, this method feels counterintuitive. Slowing down to think better? It sounds inefficient. But that's the trap. Confusing mental speed with mental sharpness. Descartes taught the opposite. That speed without structure leads to collapse. Only thought built on solid ground can carry the weight of action. This practice doesn't silence your thoughts. It reorganizes them. It reclaims your attention from the irrational and places it in service of what's verifiable. Over time, your mind learns to distinguish between noise and signal. You stop trying to answer every doubt. Instead, you sort them, challenge them, and often discard them. Clarity is not a gift, it's a discipline. And the Descartes method gives you the frame to practice it, not in abstract debate, but in the most personal battlefield of all, your own mind. Practice 8, the 20-40-60 rule of perspective. One of the most deceptive features of the overthinking mind is its obsession with what others might think. You second-guess your choices, replay conversations, anticipate judgment that may never come. You hesitate to act not because of your own voice, but because of the imagined chorus of everyone else's. This mental noise isn't just distracting, it's paralyzing. And it's almost always rooted in a distorted sense of importance. The belief that the world is watching, that every move is under scrutiny. But perspective destroys that illusion. There's a principle, part Stoic, part psychological, that shatters the grip of self-conscious overthinking. It's often called the 20-40-60 rule. At 20, you think everyone is paying attention to you. At 40, you realize you don't care what they think. And at 60, you understand the truth. No one was ever thinking about you that much in the first place. This insight isn't cynical. It's liberating. It removes the burden of imagined judgment and replaces it with freedom. Michel de Montaigne, the great introspective philosopher, knew this intimately. He wrote that, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. That is, to act not from performance, but from alignment." Practicing this perspective requires a shift in the questions you ask yourself. Instead of, "What will they think if I do this?" ask, "What will I think if I don't?" Instead of, "What if I look foolish?" ask, "What if I stay stuck?" These reversals break the illusion of external control and bring your attention back to where it belongs, your internal compass. Cognitive behavioral models support this shift. They show how distorted thinking patterns, like mind reading and personalization, create unnecessary stress. When you believe you know what others think of you, your anxiety becomes self-generated. The 20-40-60 rule cuts through this by exposing the fragile foundation of that belief. When you internalize this principle, you begin to act with more confidence, not because your fears vanish, but because their weight diminishes. You move, speak, and decide from a place of clarity, knowing that most of the resistance exists only in your mind. The imagined audience begins to dissolve, and in its place you find a deeper connection with yourself. There's peace in realizing that the spotlight you fear is mostly imagined, that the criticism you anticipate is often projection, that the silence from others isn't judgment, it's just life moving on, and that your focus is too precious to be spent managing shadows. Perspective won't stop all overthinking, but it will unmask much of it. And what's revealed in that unmasking is this: when you stop living for a perception that doesn't exist, you gain the space to live for what truly does. Practice 9. The focus window ritual. You weren't made to multitask. Your brain, as advanced as it is, functions best when it moves with intention, not fragmentation. Yet most people wake up and immediately scatter their attention. They open 5 tabs, start 3 tasks, respond to endless inputs, all while expecting clarity to somehow emerge from the chaos. But focus isn't born in distraction. It's trained, ritualized, protected, and that begins with creating what neuroscientist Andrew Huberman calls focus windows, dedicated periods where your mind is taught to go deep without interruption. This is not just productivity advice, it's neurobiology. The brain has finite attentional resources. Each time you switch tasks, you lose focus currency. Each distraction, no matter how small, resets your neural momentum. So when you try to do everything at once, your mind becomes like a lens that can't quite focus the light. Everything feels slightly blurry, slightly off. The focus window ritual is a daily practice of sharpening that lens. You choose a specific block of time, ideally 90 minutes, and decide in advance what that window is for. One task, one intention, one outcome. Before the window begins, you eliminate digital noise. No notifications, no open tabs, no background chatter. This is a sacred space, not because of what happens inside it, but because of what doesn't. The ritual begins with a signal. It could be a cup of tea, a walk around the block, a breath pattern, anything that tells your brain, now we shift. This pattern builds over time. The brain learns to associate that signal with deep work. Like a musician tuning an instrument, you begin to tune your attention. You're no longer passively reacting. You're deliberately entering a state where overthinking cannot survive, because there is no space for it. Over time, something incredible happens. Your anxiety around work decreases. Your satisfaction increases. Why? Because your brain starts experiencing the reward of completion. Dopamine is released not by jumping between tasks, but by finishing them, by holding your attention long enough to move something forward. Philosophically, this is presence turned into discipline. Descartes would have called it clarity through order. The Stoics would have called it directing your energy toward what's in your control. Psychologists today call it flow, but whatever name you give it, the effect is the same. You become the one who decides where your mind goes, not the environment around you. Focus isn't about forcing your brain to obey. It's about removing the obstacles that scatter it. The focus window ritual does exactly that. It carves out a space where clarity isn't an accident, it's inevitable. Practice 10, the language detox. The words you speak to yourself are not harmless. They are not neutral. Language carries weight, and when it becomes habitual, it becomes identity. If you constantly tell yourself, I have to, I should, I can't, your brain begins to obey those commands. Without realizing it, you create an inner environment of pressure, guilt, and resistance. And in that environment, overthinking thrives. The loop begins not with fear, but with the way you describe your life. Cognitive behavioral therapy has long demonstrated how language shapes emotion. The words you use determine the frame through which you interpret reality. When your internal dialogue is filled with pressure-based terms, your nervous system responds with stress. I should have done more today doesn't just sound critical, it triggers the body's stress response. Over time, the brain begins to associate every choice with anxiety. The result? Mental clutter, emotional fatigue, paralysis of analysis. The detox begins with awareness. Catch the shoulds, catch the musts. Catch the language that makes you feel like life is a constant obligation. Then replace it, not with vague positivity, but with empowered accuracy. Instead of I should, try I choose to. Instead of I have to, say I'm deciding to. These are not just semantics, they rewire your sense of agency. Andrew Huberman teaches that language and attention share overlapping networks in the brain. When you shift your words, you shift what your brain prioritizes. You stop processing tasks as threats and begin processing them as chosen directions. Your physiology follows. Stress decreases. Focus increases. Your inner voice becomes less of a drill sergeant and more of a strategist. This detox isn't about talking softly to yourself. It's about talking clearly. Descartes didn't seek comfort. He sought precision. Montaigne didn't chase happiness. He chased understanding. The goal here is the same. To use language that reflects reality, not fear. To describe your life in a way that empowers you to act, rather than overthink. Practice this out loud. Hear the shift. Feel the difference between, I can't handle this, and, this is difficult, but I'll face it one step at a time. One triggers shutdown. The other creates movement. And in the space between those words, your mind finds oxygen. Overthinking often begins as a reaction to language you didn't question. Now you question it. Now you take it back. And with every corrected phrase, you tell your brain, I am not a victim of my mind. I am the one giving it instructions. Practice 11. The clarity walk. Thinking does not always require sitting still. In fact, some of the clearest thoughts emerge when the body moves. The brain was not built in isolation from motion. It evolved alongside it. When you walk, especially without a fixed destination, your mind enters a different rhythm. Your thoughts begin to unwind. Your nervous system recalibrates, and the fog that once clouded your decisions starts to lift. Neuroscience confirms what the ancients already sensed. Light, consistent movement like walking lowers cortisol, improves dopamine regulation, and stimulates the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought and long-term planning. Andrew Huberman emphasizes the role of forward motion in resetting your internal state. It's not just about exercise, it's about engaging the optic flow, your visual field shifting side to side as you move, which helps deactivate the fight or flight response and invite mental spaciousness. Overthinking is often a state of mental stillness, a mind running while the body remains trapped. But walking offers release, not through analysis, but through rhythm. Each step becomes a metronome that slows the tempo of your thoughts. Each breath becomes deeper, more grounded. You begin to notice things outside yourself. Wind on your face, leaves moving, the crunch of gravel. And as your attention expands outward, the intensity of internal noise begins to fade. There's no performance here. You're not trying to solve everything. You're just walking, giving your brain room to reorganize itself, like a shaken snow globe settling back into clarity. Some of your best ideas won't arrive when you sit down to force them. They'll come when you stop trying to force anything at all. Philosophers throughout history, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, were walkers. Not because they needed steps, but because movement gave shape to their thinking. In walking, you are not escaping thought. You are letting it breathe. The clarity walk becomes most powerful when done without devices. No podcast, no music, no external noise to fill the silence. Let the silence do its work. Let your thoughts move as freely as your feet. Let yourself feel what arises without judgment. And if your mind starts to loop again, notice the pattern. And then gently return to your steps, to your breath, to the moment in front of you. This is not a break from thinking. It's a better environment for it. When your body moves, your mind follows. And in that movement, you don't just gain clarity. You restore trust in your own ability to think clearly again. Practice 12. The Midnight Firewall. You tell yourself you're just going to check one more thing. A message, a headline, a video. But your mind is already wired tight, pulsing with the residue of the day. And what you think is harmless scrolling becomes a direct assault on your brain's ability to slow down, rest, and reset. Overthinking doesn't always start in the middle of the night. It often begins with what you allow into your system just before sleep. Sleep is not the absence of activity. It is the sacred process where the brain repairs, integrates, and reorganizes. When you fill your final waking moments with artificial light, chaotic information, or emotional triggers, you are essentially programming your brain to stay alert in the very moment it needs to shut down. The result? You lie in bed, physically still, but mentally electric. Thoughts race, scenarios play, regrets surface, clarity disappears, replaced by noise in the dark. This is where the midnight firewall comes in. A practice of protecting the final hour of your day like it's sacred ground. A hard stop. A digital sunset. 1 hour before you intend to sleep, cut the circuit. No screens, no stimulation, no more inputs that your mind is tempted to process overnight. Andrew Huberman explains that screen exposure before sleep disrupts melatonin release and delays the onset of true rest. But it's not just biology, it's behavioral. When you train your brain to expect stimulation until the last moment, you rob it of the signal that says, "We're done now." The firewall gives you that signal. It draws the boundary that your nervous system desperately needs to decompress. Replace that final hour with low-input activities. Dim lights, a warm shower, journaling, stretching, listening to soft, predictable sounds. Nothing that demands interpretation or reaction. You're not distracting yourself. You're winding yourself down. You're transitioning from noise to stillness with intention. And here's the deeper layer. Overthinkers often fear silence. They avoid it by staying connected to the world. But true clarity requires you to face that silence and reframe it, not as a threat, but as an invitation. In that hour of stillness, you begin to hear something other than fear. You hear yourself, your real self, beneath the loops. This firewall isn't rigid, it's restorative. It tells your mind, the day is over, and I am safe to rest. That message matters, because how you sleep shapes how you wake. And how you wake determines whether your day starts with clarity or with the debris of yesterday's overstimulation. Guard your nights. They are the roots of your mental clarity. And with each protected hour, your overthinking brain learns to do what it's forgotten. Let go. The single-task declaration. Overthinking is often mistaken for productivity. You think you're being efficient by juggling multiple tasks, managing dozens of open loops, mentally rehearsing every possible outcome. But in truth, this state fractures your attention, dulls your intuition, and leaves you exhausted without progress. You end the day with a head full of unfinished intentions and a body that feels like it ran a marathon without moving. But there's a different path, one rooted in radical simplicity. The single task declaration is a practice of reclaiming your mental bandwidth by committing to just one meaningful action each day, not 10 small tasks, not 5 priorities. 1. Something that carries weight, something that moves your life, your mind, or your soul forward. And most importantly, something you complete. Aristotle taught that excellence is not an act, but a habit. And habits are not built in clutter, they are forged in focus. When you declare a single task, you give your mind permission to stop spinning. You cut through the fog of options and create a straight path, a direction your attention can follow without friction. This is not about doing less. It's about choosing with precision. When you wake, ask yourself, if I could only do one thing today that truly matters, what would it be? Then build your schedule around that answer. The declaration becomes a compass. It guides your energy, your time, and your decisions. Distractions become easier to identify because you've already chosen your target. Neuroscience supports this. Dopamine is not just about pleasure, it's about pursuit. When the brain has a clear objective, it releases dopamine to sustain the effort toward it. But when your goals are vague or scattered, dopamine becomes diluted. You feel busy, but unfulfilled. The single task declaration restores this neurochemical focus. It teaches your brain to value completion over chaos. Philosophically, it is the practice of choosing order over noise. It echoes Descartes' discipline of narrowing attention to the most essential. It aligns with Stoic thinking. Control what you can, ignore what you can't. Act where it matters. You'll be tempted to resist this, to add more, to say, but I have so much to do. That's the addiction to overwhelmed speaking. Break it. Choose one task. Finish it. Then, if time and energy remain, move to the next. But never start with the many. Start with the one. Over time, this declaration becomes more than a technique. It becomes a mindset. You stop scattering yourself. You stop measuring days by quantity. You begin measuring them by impact. And in that impact, clarity returns. Not as a moment, but as a way of being. From noise to clarity. You began this journey in a familiar place, the chaos of a mind that never stops spinning. You've felt the exhaustion of thinking without rest, the tension of carrying questions that have no answers, the weight of mental loops that keep you stuck in a place you don't want to be. Overthinking isn't just tiring, it's paralyzing. It steals your ability to act, to feel, to breathe. But now, something has shifted. Not because the world around you changed, but because you've been handed the tools to change the world inside your head. 13 practices, each one simple. Each one rooted in science, in philosophy, in lived human experience. Each one offering not a miracle, but a mechanism, a way to pause, to reset, to come back to yourself. You've learned how to interrupt the storm with a single breath, how to quiet your brain's chemical chaos, how to move with intention, how to stop feeding the noise and start building space for signal. And most importantly, you've learned that clarity is not something you wait for, it's something you create. Jordan Peterson speaks of order as the antidote to chaos. Descartes sought certainty as the path to reason. Huberman explains how your biology can be trained to support peace instead of panic. This isn't theory. This is a blueprint. And now it's yours. But here's what matters most. Clarity isn't a destination. It's a discipline. It's not a final state you achieve once and for all. It's a practice you return to when the noise rises again. Because it will. Life is full of motion. Your mind will wander. Your stress will spike. Old patterns will whisper. But now you know the way back. The path is not complicated. It's deliberate. It begins with noticing the loop, then choosing a reset, anchoring your senses, questioning your thoughts, moving your body, reclaiming your attention, protecting your nights, and above all, acting from the deep, quiet part of you that knows what matters most. Imagine your mind now as a river that once flooded its banks, rushing, muddy, untamed. And now slowly, the waters are settling. You begin to see the surface again. The reflection returns. The path ahead becomes visible. This is what clarity feels like, not silence, but space, not emptiness, but presence. You are not broken. Your brain is not your enemy. It's brilliant. It's adaptive. And with these practices, it can be trained to work for you, not against you. You now have the choice to return to the loop or to move with focus, depth, and peace. Choose clarity. Not because it's easy, but because it's possible. Clarity is not something you find, it's something you train.